If I had left my house 5 minutes later that day, I would still believe I had the perfect marriage. Sometimes, life doesn't warn you before it changes. It doesn't send you a message. It doesn't give you a sign. It simply lets one ordinary moment become the reason your whole world falls apart. And this is how mine did. That Tuesday morning looked exactly like every other Tuesday. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. I ignored it. My husband laughed and said, "If you don't wake up now, you blame it on Lagos traffic instead of yourself." I threw a pillow at him. He caught it. We both laughed. That was us. We laughed over the smallest things. People always said we looked happy. And to be honest, I believed we were. We had been married for 6 years, no children. Not because we didn't want them. Life simply hadn't given us that blessing yet. But still, we had each other. Or at least, that's exactly what I believed. He went into the kitchen. A few minutes later, I smelled fried eggs and toasted bread. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. That was just who he was. Every Tuesday, he made breakfast because he knew mornings weren't my best friend. Little things like that made me fall in love over and over again with him. While we ate, he talked about work. A client had been stressing him for weeks. I told him he worried too much. He smiled. "That's why I married you," he said. "You worry enough for both of us." I rolled my eyes, and very funny. If someone had walked into our house that morning, they would have seen a normal couple, a happy couple. Nothing looked broken, nothing felt wrong. Looking back now, I realize the most dangerous lies are the ones that look like peace. By 7:30, we were both ready to leave. He kissed my forehead, picked up his car keys, and just before walking out, he turned back. "Don't forget your lunch," he said. And I laughed. "You're starting to sound like my mother." And he said someone has to. And then he left. I stood by the window for a moment and watched him drive away. I had no idea that would be the last time I would watch him leave the house without questioning who he really was. A few minutes later, I locked the front door and headed to my own car. I had barely started the engine when my phone rang. And boom, it was my older sister. Normally, I would have ignored the call because I was running late already. But something in me told me to answer the call. She reminded me about our mother's birthday dinner that weekend. We laughed about who was bringing the food and all that. She complained that our younger brother still hadn't confirmed if he was coming. Anyway, nothing serious. It was just a family talk. So, 5 minutes, and that was all. Exactly 5 minutes. When the call ended, I drove off without thinking twice. If I hadn't answered that call, I would have reached my office much earlier, and none of this story would ever exist. And then about 20 minutes later, I remembered something that made my heart sink. My office keys. I had left them on the dining table. I almost turned back, and then I remembered my husband kept a spare set in his office because this wasn't the first time I would be forgetting my office keys. His office was only a few streets away from mine. I would surprise him, so I thought. Maybe we would even grab a coffee together before work and all that. Funny how life lets you make innocent plans while it's preparing you for something completely different. His office building had a small cafe, across the road. I parked there. The place wasn't crowded. People sat quietly with their laptops. A waiter wiped down empty tables. Someone was laughing near the entrance. Everything looked ordinary until I looked through the glass. that's through the window glass and saw my husband. I frowned. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had told me he had an early meeting. He had complained about being late, yet here he was, relaxed, smiling, holding a cup of coffee. And then across him sat a woman. She looked to be our age, elegant, confident, the kind of person who didn't seem uncomfortable being around there. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't looking around. She looked completely at home. The way she smiled at him wasn't the smile people give to their colleagues. It wasn't even a smile of an old friend. It was familiar, comfortable, intimate. I told myself not to jump into conclusions. Maybe she was just a client, or maybe I was overthinking. Then she reached across the table and held his hands. I felt something go cold. Not angry, not yet, just cold. I wanted to storm inside and demand an explanation. Throw my wedding rings on the table, but something stopped me. I don't know what. Maybe instinct. Instead, I stepped behind a parked SUV where they couldn't see me, and I watched. The waitress brought another plate. My husband cut a piece of pancake, placed it on the fork, and held it towards the woman. She laughed before taking the bite. It wasn't just breakfast anymore. It looked like a family. And then I noticed something else. His wedding ring. It wasn't on his finger, and then I blinked. Maybe I was mistaken. I looked again. No ring. The man who never took off his wedding ring wasn't wearing it. And then my breathing became shallow. My hand started shaking. I reached out for my handbag and pulled out my phone. I needed the proof. Even if no one else believed me, I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I opened the camera, zoomed in, just as I was about to take the picture. I heard tiny footsteps. A little girl, not older than 6 years, came running towards the cafe. She rushed straight to their table. Without hesitation, she jumped into the arms of my husband, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. He kissed her forehead. She wrapped both arms around his neck. The woman smiled, not surprised, not embarrassed, just happy, like she had watched that moment many times before. My heart pounded so loudly. I couldn't hear anything else. And then the little girl leaned to his face and giggled and said one word, "Daddy." Everything around me disappeared. The traffic, the people, the noise, nothing mattered anymore. My husband and I never had a child. So, why was another little girl calling him daddy, like she's been doing it her whole life? I stood frozen, still holding my phone, still staring through the glass, and then my husband slowly turned his head, his eyes lifted, and for one terrifying second, I was almost certain he was looking straight at me. Every choice has a consequence. Mine began 5 minutes early, and for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't sure I knew the man I had married. They say the truth sets you free, but they never tell you that before it sets you free, it first breaks your heart. I thought the hardest part was hearing that little girl call my husband daddy, but I was wrong. The hardest part was what happened next. He turned slowly, and for one terrifying second, I thought, or I was sure he had seen me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. And without thinking, I ducked behind a black SUV parked beside a cafe. I held my breath and didn't move. A few seconds passed, and then another. The sounds of traffic filled the streets. Someone nearby laughed. Motorcycles sped fast. Everything around me moved and continued as if my life wasn't falling apart. Carefully, I lifted my head to look through the cafe window again. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was smiling at the little girl. Maybe he hadn't seen me after all. Or maybe he had, and he was pretending he hadn't. I didn't even know which one that frightened me more. So, the little girl climbed onto his lap again. She couldn't have been older than maybe 6. Yeah, maybe 6. She kept talking, laughing, pointing at someone outside the window. My husband listened to every single word as if nothing else mattered in this world. And then he picked up his fork again, cut another piece of pancake, blew on it gently, and fed her. She giggled. Then the woman sitting across kept on smiling. Not the smile of someone trying to steal another person's husband. No, it was a bit softer than that, almost grateful, and that confused me. If this was an affair, why didn't he feel like one? I reached into my handbag. My fingers were shaking. I pulled out my phone. I needed proof. Not for anyone else, but for myself. Because a small part of me still hoped I was imagining everything. I opened the camera and zoomed in. My hands wouldn't stay still. The picture kept shaking. I took a deep breath. I pressed my phone against the side of the car to steady it. And then I pressed record. There they were. My husband, the woman, the little girl, a family. Or at least, that's what it looked like. As I watched through the phone screen, something caught my attention. The woman wasn't wearing a wedding ring, just like my husband. And then I frowned. He never removed his ring. Never. Not even at home. I looked closer again. His finger had this pale mark where the ring should have been. He had taken it off. But why? Just then, his phone rang. He looked at the screen, but didn't answer it. Instead, he rejected the call. A few seconds later, he typed a quick message, and my phone vibrated inside my handbag. I nearly dropped it. My heart almost stopped, but I looked down, and it was him. Hope you got to work safely. Nothing else. No heart emoji, no love you, just one sentence. I stared at the message and then looked back through the glass. He had already put his phone away. How could he sit there, looking straight into another woman's eyes while checking whether I had arrived safely? How? Was he pretending to care? Or did he actually care? Nothing made sense anymore. The waitress, she brought another bill. The woman reached for it, but my husband gently stopped her. He paid, and the little girl clapped. She looked so happy. I hated myself for ever thinking this, but she was beautiful. She had the brightest smile, the kind of smile that would melt anyone's heart. I wondered if she ever knew I existed. My husband stood up. He helped the little girl into her jacket. She stretched out both arms towards him, and without hesitation, he picked her up. She rested her head on his shoulder like she has done it 100 times before. My eyes filled with tears. Not because he carried her, but because he carried her so naturally. As if she's always belonged there. They walked out of the cafe. I quickly stepped behind the SUV again. I watched them from the side mirror. The woman unlocked a silver SUV. My husband bent down and fastened the little girl's seatbelt himself. He checked it twice before gently closing the door. And then he stood there for a moment. He didn't get into the car immediately. He looked up the sky, closed his eyes, and then sighed. It wasn't a sigh of a happy man. It sounded heavy, like someone carrying a secret. The woman touched his arm and said something, and then he nodded. To my surprise, she hugged him, but not a romantic hug. A long, quiet, and comforting kind of hug. He didn't hug back immediately, and when he finally did, he felt reluctant, almost painful. I had never seen anything like that before. The more I watched, the less I understood. And then they drove away. I should have gone to work. I should have driven back home. I should have confronted him. Instead, I did something I had never done before in my life. I followed them. I stayed 3 cars behind, just careful not to lose them and careful not to get too close. My palms were sweating. It was sweating against the steering wheel. Every traffic light felt like an enemy. Every turn made me afraid they would notice me. After almost 20 minutes, they left the busy road and entered a quiet neighborhood lined with beautiful houses and tall trees. It looked peaceful. And then finally, they stopped outside a cream-colored bungalow. The little girl jumped out of the car, first ran towards the door, and, she started laughing. The woman followed. And then my husband walked to the door. He didn't knock. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and unlocked it. He had a key. My heart sank. He wasn't visiting. He belonged there. I waited until they disappeared inside. 5 minutes later, no one came out. I switched off my engine, stepped out of my car, and slowly walked towards the house. I didn't know what I was looking for. An answer, a mistake, anything. As I reached the gate, I heard something from inside. The little girl's voice, clear as day. Daddy, are you coming back tomorrow? And then silence. I leaned a little closer. I needed to hear his answer. And then the front door slowly closed. And I heard the sound of the lock turning. I stood outside that house with more questions than answers. My husband had a spare key to another woman's house. I watched him unlock the front door like he belonged there. And then I heard a little girl call him daddy. I should have walked away. I should have confronted him. But I stood outside instead, waiting. Because something about what I had just seen didn't feel like an affair. It felt like a secret. And I was about to discover that some secrets are far more dangerous than lies. And then I stood outside the gate, unable to move. My eyes were fixed on that front door. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I kept hoping the door would open again. I kept hoping someone would come outside and explain everything. But the house remained silent. Almost a minute passed before I stepped away from the gate. I walked back to my car, opened the driver's door and sat without starting my engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but they never stopped shaking. I had so many questions and not even a single answer. If that little girl was really his daughter, why had he hidden her away from me? And if that woman was his wife too, how had he managed to live two different lives for 6 years without me noticing? None of it ever made sense. And then something moved upstairs. The curtain by one of the windows shifted slightly. Someone was behind it watching. I quickly leaned back in my seat until my eyes could only see above the dashboard. I didn't know if they had seen me or not. After a few seconds, the curtain became still again. Whoever had been there disappeared. I looked at the time. I had already missed half my work day. My phone was filled with missed calls from the office, but I ignored them. At that moment, work didn't matter anymore. My marriage was falling apart right in front of me. After about 15 minutes later, the front door opened. The woman walked outside alone. Her long hair was tied back loosely. She carried a small rubbish bag and walked towards the bin near the gate. She looked tired, not happy, not excited, just tired. Before throwing the bag away, she looked carefully up and down the street, and for one terrifying second, her eyes stopped in the direction of my car. I immediately lowered my head and held my breath. When I finally looked up again, she had gone back inside. Another 10 minutes passed. Nothing. The house became quiet again, as though nobody lived there. I knew I couldn't sit there forever. So with one last look at the cream-colored bungalow, I started my engine and drove away. The journey home felt longer than ever. Every traffic light gave me another chance to replay everything I had seen. The little girl climbing onto his lap, the way he smiled at her, the way he fastened her seatbelt, the hug, the voice calling him daddy. Every moment felt heavier than ever before. When I got home, the house felt strangely empty. His coffee mug was still in the sink. The pillow he had thrown at me in the morning was still lying on the bedroom floor. Only a few hours had passed, yet it felt as if I had been away for years. I picked up the pillow and placed it neatly on the bed. As I turned around, my eyes stopped on his wardrobe. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Something inside me simply told me to open it. Everything looked normal at first. His shirts were neatly hanging there. His suits were arranged exactly the way I always kept them. His shoes were lined up underneath. I almost closed the wardrobe when I noticed a small gap between two jackets. It looked like another jacket had been removed recently. I searched more carefully, but nothing. Then I opened the drawer below. Inside were his watches, old receipts, travel documents, and a few small boxes. As I moved them inside, I found a velvet box hidden in the back corner. I recognized it immediately. It was the box that held his wedding ring on the day we got married. So slowly I opened it, but it was empty. I stared at it several seconds. His wedding ring wasn't inside. Of course, it wasn't. He had taken it away before meeting that woman. But why hide the empty box? Why keep it at all? Well, I gently returned everything exactly the way I found them. Just then, I heard the front door open downstairs. My heart almost stopped. He was home, earlier than usual. I quickly closed the drawer, shut the wardrobe, and tried to calm my breathing before walking downstairs. He was standing in the living room with his jacket over his arm. The moment he saw me, he smiled. "There you are," he said. "I've been calling you." I forced myself to smile back. "So have I said. And for a brief moment, his smile faded. "You didn't answer," he said. "And neither did you." The words almost came out, but I swallowed them. I wasn't ready to confront him, not until I knew the whole truth. He stepped closer and gently touched my shoulder. "How was work?" I looked into his eyes. They were the same eyes I had trusted for 6 years. The same eyes that promised they would never lie to me. But suddenly, I couldn't tell whether I was looking at my husband or a complete stranger. Before I could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen only for a few seconds, but I noticed everything. The smile disappeared from his face. He quickly turned the phone over so I couldn't see who was calling. "I'll be right back," he said. He walked into the kitchen. A few seconds later, I heard his voice, but it was low and careful, almost a whisper. I couldn't hear every word. And then, one sentence reached my ear. "No, she doesn't know." My entire body went cold. Who was he talking about? Me? Or someone else? I quietly walked towards the kitchen, careful not enough to make sound. Every step felt heavier than the last. I stopped just before the door, close enough to hear the rest of the conversation. And then I heard another voice, a woman's voice. It wasn't the woman from the cafe. It was someone else. And in that moment, I realized I had been asking the wrong questions all along. If you overheard your husband whisper she doesn't know, who would you think he was talking about? I thought I already knew the answer. I was convinced I had uncovered his secret family. But the next few minutes changed everything. The woman I expected to hear on the other phone, the end of the other phone, wasn't the woman from that cafe. That was the moment I realized I had been asking the wrong questions all along. I stood outside the kitchen, afraid to breathe. My heart pounded against my chest as I listened carefully. My husband kept his voice very low, almost as if he didn't want anyone else in the room to hear him. I could only catch a few words. "No, not yet." Then there was a pause. "I'll handle it." Another pause followed before he quietly said, "I said she doesn't know." I leaned closer, hoping to hear one more sentence, but instead, I heard footsteps coming towards me. He was already ending the call. I quickly walked back to the seats in the living room and sat down just before he came out from the kitchen. My hands folded tightly on my lap, but inside, I was trembling. He smiled as if nothing happened. "Sorry about that," he said. I nodded and forced a smile. "No problem." He sat beside me, and for the first time since we got married, I noticed something I had never seen before. He looked exhausted, not because he hadn't slept, but because something seemed to be weighing heavy on him. We sat in silence for a few moments before he reached over and gently held my hand. "I'm sorry I've been busy lately," he said softly. He squeezed my hand gently before letting it go. I searched his face, hoping it would reveal something I had missed all these years. But instead, I saw a man who looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally drained. He wasn't the face of someone celebrating a secret life. It was the face of someone carrying a burden alone. I promised, he said quietly, things would settle down soon. I wanted to ask him what he meant by that. I wanted to ask who he had just called. I wanted to ask about the woman from the cafe, the little girl, the cream-colored bungalow, and the words I overheard. But I couldn't. Every question remained trapped inside me. A few minutes later, he stood up. "I'm going to take a shower," he said as he picked up a towel. He slipped his phone into the pocket of his trouser he had taken off earlier and left them hanging over the arm of the sofa before heading upstairs. A few seconds later, I heard the bathroom door close, followed by the sound of the running water. I remained where I was, staring at the staircase. My conscience told me to leave his things alone. But another part of me reminded me that this was the same man who had a key to another woman's house. So, slowly I stood up. I glanced upstairs once more before picking up his trousers. My hands were shaking as I searched through the pockets. The first pocket held only his car keys. The second one contained a few receipts, folded. And then my fingers touched a small piece of paper tucked neatly into the back pocket. I unfolded it carefully. It was a pharmacy receipt. At first, it looked ordinary. The name of the pharmacy was printed across the top, followed by a long list of medications that I couldn't even pronounce. My eyes moved slowly down the page until they stopped on one word: chemotherapy. I blinked, then read again: chemotherapy. The word refused to change. The receipt looked recent. The paper was still crisp. The ink hadn't even begun to fade. My husband hardly ever stepped into a pharmacy. Even when he had a simple headache, he would complain for 2 days before agreeing to buy painkillers. So why was he carrying a receipt with chemotherapy medications on it? I knew one thing almost immediately. Those medications weren't for him. They had to belong to someone else. But who? The woman from the cafe? The little girl? The woman whose voice I overheard on the phone? Or was there someone else I knew nothing about? A cold feeling settled in my chest. Whoever those medications belonged to, they weren't being treated for an ordinary illness. I carefully folded the receipt exactly the way I found it and slipped it back into his back pocket. Just then, I heard the bathroom door open upstairs. I quickly returned the trousers to the sofa and sat down before he walked into the living room, drying his hair with a towel. You didn't rest, he asked. I wasn't sleepy, I replied. He smiled faintly. I will make us something to eat, he said. I watched him walk into the kitchen. His movements were different, slower. He stopped more than once as though he had forgotten what he wanted to do. Twice, I noticed him rub the bridge of his nose before taking a deep breath and continuing. Everything about him felt heavy. Whatever he was carrying, he wasn't getting any lighter. We ate dinner quietly that evening. Normally, one of us would have found something to laugh about before the meal was over. But that night, silence was between us. It wasn't an angry silence. It was the silence of two people sitting in the same room while living in completely different worlds. Halfway through the dinner, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen for barely a second before standing up. I'll be back, he said softly. Instead of answering the call inside the house, he walked through the back door into the compound. I waited a few seconds before quietly making my way into the kitchen. And from the kitchen window, I could see part of the backyard. He stood near the fence with his back turned towards the house, the phone pressed against his ear. I couldn't hear what was being said. I could only watch. At first, he spoke, and then he became quiet. He lowered his head and simply listened. Several seconds passed without saying a word. Then, I saw something I never imagined I would see. He lifted his hand to his face. At first, I thought he was rubbing his eyes. And then, he slowly wiped across both cheeks. He was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly wiping away tears before anyone could see them. I stood frozen. I had known this man for 6 years. I had seen him lose his father. I had seen us lose a pregnancy. I had watched him go through disappointments that would have broken many people. Not once had I seen him cry. Yet, here he was, standing alone in the dark, trying to hide his tears from the rest of the world. A few moments later, he took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, wiped his face one last time and forced a smile before walking back towards the house. My heart skipped. He was coming inside the house. I hurried away from the kitchen window and rushed back into the living room. I picked up the television remote and pretended to scroll through the channels just as the back door opened. You found something interesting to watch? He asked with a tired smile. I looked up briefly and shrugged. Not really. I'm just passing time. He nodded and sat beside me as though nothing happened. If I hadn't watched him through that kitchen window, I would have never believed he had been crying only seconds earlier. Later that night, we got ready for bed. The bedroom was unusually quiet. He lay down first, and within minutes, his breathing became slow and steady. I turned slightly and looked at him. His face looked calm, almost peaceful. I couldn't understand it. How could someone carrying so much inside him fall asleep so easily? Then again, maybe he wasn't sleeping because he had peace. Maybe he was simply exhausted. The man lying beside me no longer looked like the husband I had left the house with that morning. He looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy to share. Sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring into the darkness, replaying everything that had happened since my sister's phone call delayed me by 5 minutes. If I hadn't answered that call, I would never have gone to the office. I would never have seen him at the cafe. I would never have followed him to that cream-colored bungalow. I would never have heard that little girl call him daddy. I would never have overheard another woman's voice on the phone. I would never have found a pharmacy receipt with the word chemotherapy printed across it. And I would never have seen my husband standing alone
outside, quietly wiping tears from his face. Nothing made sense anymore. Every answer only created another question. The more I tried to put these pieces together, the less they seemed to fit. Just then, the silence was broken by the soft vibration of his phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up. Without thinking, my eyes drifted towards it. A message appeared on the lock screen. "She's getting weak." I felt my heart skip. That was all it said. No name, no explanation, just 3 words. "She's getting weak." I slowly turned to look at my husband. He didn't move. His breathing remained steady. He had no idea another piece of his secret had just appeared before my eyes. I looked back at the phone. Who was she? The woman from the cafe? The little girl? The woman whose voice I overheard earlier on the phone? Or someone I hadn't even met? Then, my thoughts returned to the pharmacy receipt. Chemotherapy. For the first time that day, those two things felt connected. I lay awake until the morning without sleeping. By sunrise, I knew one thing for certain. I had spent the whole day trying to uncover one secret. Instead, I had stumbled into something much bigger. And somehow, everyone seemed to know what was happening, except me. Have you ever reached the point you no longer wanted explanations, but you only wanted the truth? Well, I did. For days, I had followed my husband like a total stranger. I watched another little girl call him daddy. I watched him unlock the door of a cream-colored bungalow with his own key. I overheard him whisper on the phone, "She doesn't know." I found a pharmacy receipt with chemotherapy medications right inside his pocket. I watched him cry when he thought nobody was looking. Every clue pointed somewhere, yet none of them fit together. By that morning, I was already tired of guessing. Whatever the truth was, it was going to end that day, one way or the other. The moment my husband drove out of our compound, I picked up my handbag and I left too. My heart was racing, but not from fear anymore. I was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending nothing was wrong. Exhausted from creating answers in my own head. I no longer wanted to spy on him from a distance. I was going to that cream-colored bungalow, and this time I wasn't hiding behind parked cars or looking through the windows. The journey felt longer than usual. Every traffic light tested my patience. Every slow-moving vehicle in front of me felt like an obstacle standing between me and the truth. When I finally turned into that quiet street, I saw his car already parked outside the bungalow. He was there. For a moment, I almost drove away. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. If I turned around now, I could still pretend none of this existed. But I had already done enough of pretending. I parked directly behind his car. This time, I didn't care if he saw me. I stepped out and walked towards the gate. Every step felt heavier than the last. The gate wasn't locked. I pushed it open. The sound made everyone inside look towards me. And there he was, standing in the front of a small yard. The little girl was sitting on the swing while he gently pushed her back and forth. She laughed so freely that anyone watching would believe they were father and daughter. The woman from the cafe stood nearby, smiling as she watched them. The moment my husband saw me, the smile disappeared from his face. His hand slowly left the swing. The little girl looked from him to me, confused. Nobody spoke. The silence between us felt louder than an argument. So, I finally said, "This is where you have been." He swallowed. "It's not what you think." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had heard those exact words in too many films. "I've been standing outside this house for days," I said quietly. "I've watched that little girl call you daddy. I watched you unlock this house with your own key. I watched you hide phone calls. I watched you cry." And then my voice broke. "And you still want to tell me this isn't what I think?" The woman from the cafe took a small step forward. "Please." I raised my hand. "No." I looked straight into her eyes. "Not today. This is between my husband and I." She stopped where she was. My husband walked slowly towards me. His face looked pale. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" I asked. "After another 6 years?" He lowered his eyes. "I was waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I couldn't stop the tears anymore. "Do you know what I've been through these past few days?" I questioned my own marriage. I questioned my own sanity. I even started wondering whether I had ever known the man I married. And then the little girl quietly climbed down from the swing. She looked frightened. She walked towards my husband and held his hand. "Daddy." Oh! The word cut through me all over again. I looked at the little girl, then back at him. "So, you really are her father?" Before he could answer, the woman from the cafe spoke. "No." I turned sharply. She continued calmly. "He isn't." I frowned. "What? He isn't her biological father?" For a second, nobody moved. I stared at her, waiting for her to continue. Instead, she looked at my husband, almost as if asking for his permission. He slowly shook his head. "Not yet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not yet?" What exactly does that mean? I looked at both of them. Do both of you enjoy speaking in riddles? I deserve the truth. And then the woman took a deep breath. "I know you do, but isn't in my place." I felt anger rising inside me. Then whose place is it? My husband's? The same husband who has been lying to me? And then my husband finally spoke. "I never lied about loving you. You hid an entire child from me." I hid a promise. The words cut me off. "A promise?" He nodded. "Yes." I took a step closer. "Then explain it." He opened his mouth. Before he could say another word, an elderly woman slowly walked out of the house. She looked weak, but smiled warmly when she saw my husband. "My son," she said, "thank you for bringing my medication yesterday." She held up a white pharmacy bag. "I've started my treatment because of you." My eyes immediately fell on the hospital label attached to the bag. The same pharmacy, the same logo I had seen on the receipt. The elderly woman noticed me looking. She smiled. "I pray God blesses this young man. If he hadn't helped us collect these medicines, my treatment would have been delayed again." I looked at the handbag, then looked at my husband, then back at the woman. "So, the chemotherapy?" The woman nodded gently. "It was for me." And then there was silence. The receipt. The word that had haunted me for days. The clue I had built 100 different stories around. It had never been about my husband. It had never been about the little girl. It wasn't even about the woman from the cafe. It belonged to this elderly woman. I suddenly felt embarrassed. Not because I had misunderstood everything, but because I had never imagined there could be another explanation. The elderly woman looked from my husband to me, then quietly walked back inside. Unaware of the storm surrounding us, I turned back towards him. The chemotherapy wasn't your secret? He shook his head. No. And then what is it? He looked towards the little girl. She was quietly drawing circles on the ground with her shoe, completely unaware that her future was about to change. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. I have lived every day hoping this moment would never come. I folded my hands. It has. He nodded slowly. I know. And then he looked at the woman from the cafe. I can't hide it anymore, he said. She lowered her head. The little girl looked up at all of us. Is there anything wrong? Nobody answered. She looked at my husband again. Daddy! He forced a smile and gently stroked her hair. Go inside for a minute, I'll come soon. She nodded obediently and ran into the house. The moment the door closed behind her, he looked back at me, took one deep breath, and quietly said, the day we met, I should have told you that before you came into my life. There was already another little life depending on me. My head was spinning. The chemotherapy receipt wasn't his. It wasn't the little girl's either. And for days I had built an entire story around one word printed on a piece of paper, only to discover it belonged to an elderly woman who was fighting for her life. Now one mystery disappeared, but the biggest one was still standing right in front of me. I looked at my husband with tears running through my eyes. Enough, I quietly said. No more half-truths, no more promises to explain later. I have followed you, I have watched you, I have doubted myself, and I have doubted you. Today, it's either you tell me everything or this is where our marriage ends. He closed his eyes for a brief moment before taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, they were filled with pain. You're right, he said softly. You deserve to know everything, and I should have told you long before now. The woman from the cafe gently walked inside with the little girl as she was trying to come out again. The compound suddenly became silent. It was just the two of us. My husband rested both hands on the back of a plastic chair as though he needed something to hold him up. 16 years ago he began. Long before I met you, I had one friend who was closer to me than a brother. His name was Tunde. I remained silent, listening. We met in university. We started our first jobs together. We shared almost everything. When he got married, I was his best man. When his daughter was born, then he paused and smiled faintly through his tears. I was the first person he called. I even carried her before some of their relatives did. And then my heart tightened. The little girl? He nodded yes. I swallowed slowly. Then, why does she call you daddy? I asked. He looked away for a moment before answering. Because she was too young to understand death. The words settled between us like a heavy stone. He continued. Tunde and his wife were involved in a terrible accident while traveling at night. He died before help arrived. My eyes opened widely. His wife survived, but she suffered serious injuries. She spent months in the hospital and never fully recovered. Tunde knew how sick she had been before the accident. He always feared something might happen to the both of them. So months before he died, he made me promise him something. He said, if anything happens to us, don't let my daughter grow up feeling abandoned. And then my husband lowered his head. He said, I laughed at him then. I told him nothing would happen. I wish I had been right. I felt my anger beginning to weaken. But the questions refused to stop. That still doesn't explain why you hid everything from me. He nodded slowly. After Tunde died, his family blamed his wife for the accident. They took almost everything they owned. She was left with debts, hospital appointments, and a frightened little girl who cried every night asking where her father had gone. I couldn't walk away. I started helping quietly. At first it was money, then school fees, then hospital visits. Sometimes I took groceries. Sometimes I simply sat with the little girl because her mother was too weak to get out of bed. He looked towards the house. The first time she called me daddy, I corrected her immediately. I told her I wasn't her father. She cried for hours. Her mother later explained that she only remembered her father through old photographs. She had started seeing me so often that in her mind, I became the closest thing she had left. Tears rolled down his cheeks again. The doctors advised us not to keep her confusing while she was already dealing with trauma. They said she would understand better as she grew older. So I stopped correcting her. I wiped my own tears, but another question remained. The key to this house. He said her mother became too weak to move around some days. There were times I had to bring medication, food, or take the little girl to school when nobody else could help. She gave me a spare key in case of emergencies. And then the cafe? He smiled sadly. She had just received encouraging news after another hospital review. The little girl wanted some pancakes because they used to be her father's favorite breakfast. She begged me to come with them. I couldn't say no. And then I closed my eyes. Every scene I had witnessed suddenly looked completely different. The hug outside the cafe wasn't romantic. It was gratitude. The heavy sigh wasn't guilt. It wasn't exhaustion. The tears in the backyard weren't because of another woman. They were because someone else's life was slowly slipping away despite all he was doing. And then, the woman I heard on the phone, he sighed deeply. She is the family lawyer handling Tunde's remaining property. She has been trying for months to recover all that was taken after his death. She called that day because some documents had finally been approved. I stared at him. And when you said she doesn't know, he nodded. I was talking about you. She asked whether I had finally told you everything. I said no, because I was afraid. Afraid of what I asked? Afraid that after everything we have been through trying to have children, you would think I had another family behind your back. Afraid you would leave before I could explain. Every week I planned to tell you. Every week I lost courage. My tears flowed freely now. Do you know what your silence did to me? I whispered. I know, he replied, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then the front door opened gently. The little girl stepped outside holding a small drawing in her hands. She looked from my husband to me before walking slowly towards us. Daddy, she said softly, is she angry because of me? My husband immediately knelt beside her. No, princess, none of this is your fault. She looked at me with frightened eyes that reminded me she was only a child caught in a story she never created. My heart broke. I slowly knelt in front of her. What's your name? I asked gently. She smiled shyly and told me. Then she stretched out the drawing she had been holding. It was a picture of 3 people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. I drew this yesterday, she said. Daddy said one day I would meet someone very special. I looked at the picture, then at my husband. He couldn't hold back his tears anymore. Neither could I. I pulled the little girl into my arms. She hugged me tightly without hesitation. In that moment, I realized something that changed me forever. The greatest threat to our marriage had never been another woman. It had never been another child. It had never even been another family. It had been silence. We both stood there crying, holding a little girl who had already lost father and almost lost the only man who had kept his promise to another. On our way home that evening, neither of us spoke for a long time. And then, without taking his eyes off the road, my husband reached across the center console and held my hand, the same way he had done on the morning this story began. This time, I held his hand back. Some secrets are kept to protect the people we love, but I learned that day that even good intentions can become dangerous when they replace honesty. Love cannot survive on assumptions. Trust cannot grow in silence, and sometimes the truth you've been afraid to tell is the very truth that saves everything before it's too late. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to my channel, share this video to your friends and loved ones. Please encourage me by leaving a comment behind. If you want more stories like this, please do let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking, and thank you for commenting. And see you in my next story. Very interesting. Please do not miss it. Thank you. Love you guys. Bye.